my humble opinion, one of life's greatest joys is having a good old sort out. Anyone else in my camp? A few of us. I love nothing more than going through my bookshelves and seeing which books I'm not going to read and then take the remainder to a charity shop. I love going through my wardrobes and thinking what doesn't fit me anymore or what am I never going to wear again, taking that to a charity shop. I love going through with a friend a loft or a garage and making it a more functional space. Oh my gosh, this stuff, it just makes me excited for my next day off. Even the Tupperware drawer. Who has a Tupperware drawer? I love sorting through that. I'll come around your house and do it for you. Making sure the lids fit the boxes and then fitting it back in a drawer in a Tetris-like fashion. It is blissful. However, there is one thing I don't like sorting out, and that's my board game shelf, which looks like this. There's a couple of wows. I know it's a thing of beauty. Sometimes my wife will ask my kids, like, where's Daddy? And they'll just find me in that room just looking at that wall. The thing is, each game represents a memory or a moment or a symbol of friendship, fun, and possible adventure. And as I keep acquiring more board games, I don't have unlimited storage for them. I need to make space. And we all do, right? If you made any New Year's resolution, you need to make space for it to happen. You can't go for a run without finding time to do it. You can't read a book without making time to read it. You can't eat healthier without planning and shopping differently. You can't learn a language or visit a relative or go to salsa classes or find the love of your life without making space. And Jesus makes space. He makes space for brokenness, for questions, for faith that doesn't look polished or religious. The thing is, most people don't stay away from the church because they hate the idea of God. Research across the UK suggests that over 60% of people say they are spiritually open, but fewer than 10% attend church regularly. So the gap is not interest, the gap is space. And that's why the first part of Penny Lane's mission statement matters. We say we exist to make space for people to meet God, find family, and change the world. Before anyone changes the world, you've got to meet God. Before anyone meets God, we have to be people who make space. So many churches and coffee shops and businesses have great, powerful mission statements, but it feels like on top of your already busy existence, on top of your job and your family and your hobbies and your Netflix binging and your doom scrolling, you have to now add on this extra list of priorities. We want to say that if we're going to be the kind of people God is calling us to be, the first thing we have to do is make space for it to happen. Luke 5 tells this story, and it's going to appear on the screens, but I'm going to read it to us from verse 17. One day, Jesus was teaching, and Pharisees and teachers of the law were sitting there. They had come from every village of Galilee and from Judea and Jerusalem, and the power of the Lord was with Jesus to heal the sick. Some men came carrying a paralyzed man on a mat and tried to take him into the house to lay him before Jesus. But when they could not find a way to do this because of the crowd, they went up on the roof and lowered him on his mat through the tiles into the middle of the crowd, right in front of Jesus. When Jesus saw their faith, he said, "Friends, your sins are forgiven." The Pharisees and the teachers of the law began thinking to themselves, "Who is this fellow who speaks blasphemy? Who can forgive sins but God alone?" Jesus knew what they were thinking and asked, "Why are you thinking these things in your heart? Which is easier, to say your sins are forgiven or to say get up and walk? But I want you to know that the Son of Man has authority on earth to forgive sins." And so he said to the paralyzed man, "I tell you, get up, take your mat, and go home." Immediately, he stood up in front of them, took what he had been lying on, and went home praising God. Everyone was amazed and gave praise to God. They were filled with awe and said, "We have seen remarkable things today." Luke tells us that Jesus is teaching in a house. And Pharisees and teachers of the law have come from every village of Galilee, Judea, and Jerusalem. He's probably in a town called Capernaum. I got to go there about 10 years ago, and currently, to this day, there's a chapel that sits on top of the historic house that Jesus had been teaching in, and there's a glass bottom, so you can see down to the bottom this house that Jesus would have been teaching in. And around Jesus are surrounded religious leaders and a huge crowd packed in tight. Then we're introduced to 5 men. 4 friends and a paralyzed man being carried on a mat. And Luke says something that's so easy to miss. They tried to take him into the house to lay him before Jesus, but because of the crowd, they could not find a way in. The problem is not Jesus. The problem is the lack of space. And this is where most churches unintentionally stop people meeting with God. Not through bad theology, not through lack of passion, but through crowded rooms and crowded priorities. There's such a temptation when churches grow to start to get really busy and spending all our time together and thinking everything has to happen with lots of people in the room. But it's counterproductive for the people of God. We have to be people who make space in our life so that we can actually build relationships with people who will then accept our invitation to church or invitation to pray for them or to spend time with them. Ultimately, making space costs us. Carrying a paralyzed man takes actual effort. Not just symbolic effort, not just, I'll pray for you, mate, effort. This is physical. It's heavy. It's awkward. And it's slow. And if you don't believe me, we're going to demonstrate it right now. I've got a mat. I'll literally do. And the Bible tells us that it's 4 men. This isn't a sexist statement. It's just the Bible story tells us this. I need 4 volunteers. Matt, you're going to come and help me. Come grab a corner. Elliot, you can squat 200 kilos. You can take a corner. Gunnar, James, you can take a corner. Up you come. And James Davison. I have 2 Jameses. That feels biblical. James is a very biblical name. You can take a corner each. And we need a paralyzed man. Andrew, will you come up? And lie on the mat. Take the posture. Okay, and on 3, lads, let's lift our friend up. And maybe take a couple of steps back this way. And then a couple of steps this way. Maybe go down the step. No, I'm joking, I won't go down the steps. You can put him down, you can put him down, you can put him down. Round of applause for our men carrying Andrew on a mat. I mean, they were shuffling on a stage, and it made me sweat. It's effort. Can you imagine them doing that down to even Leaf down the road, the cafe down the road? It takes actual physical effort. And then we're told that every village in Galilee, Judea and Jerusalem, was represented there. And we might think, oh, that's like traveling from Wavertree or Garston or Allerton. No, here's a picture of a map today on Google Maps. To make that journey is 2 days in today's terrain, where there's roads and pathways built. At the time of Jesus, it's through uneven ground, through dust, through heat, fighting off bandits and coyotes or whatever lives in the Israeli desert. And yet sometimes we are only interested in following Jesus if it's convenient. Is church on the way to my mate's house that I'm going to anyway on Sunday that I can just swing by? Does worship night clash with a football match? Is group night on a night that is going to mess with my other commitments? Can I fit my Bible reading around binging The Traitors? These people were so hungry to hear the words of Jesus that it cost them. Making space always costs something. Leadership research consistently shows us that healthy organizations, even churches, grow when we prioritize margin over efficiency. When we're saying let's create space for good things to grow rather than let's keep on adding more and more activity on top of it. If everything is full, if our diaries are full, if our time is crammed, then there's no space for anything to grow. And these friends, they didn't look for convenience. They were looking for Jesus. Sometimes we search so often for what is easy over what is fruitful. How hungry are we to hear the voice of Jesus? Space costs us something, but also the space that we make creates room for all kinds of different people. Luke is very specific with his detail. This man is paralyzed. He cannot contribute in the conventional sense. He cannot serve like the 4 around the mat. He cannot give in the same ways that the 4 around the mat can. He doesn't look like them. He doesn't move like them. He doesn't add value in the conventional ways, and yet they carry him anyway to Jesus. I read in a book a little while ago that you are the average of the 5 closest people to you. That might be parents or colleagues or friends, but you're the average of the 5 people closest to you. In all senses, in income, in preference, in style, even in weight and age and height and background and education and interests, you are probably very similar to 5 people closest to you. And yet the gospel of Jesus completely blows that out of the water. The early church exploded across the Roman Empire because it formed communities that were seen nowhere else in the modern world. Slaves and masters worshiping together. Rich and poor eating together over food. Jew and Gentile mixing, male and female praying together, ex-offenders and judges sharing communion and life together. Making space means choosing people who don't naturally fit in. If our churches only make sense to people like us, then we're not following Jesus, we're just building a history club. Jack, our worship pastor, he's off today, but he said something to me a couple of years ago that totally blew my mind. We opened this church in 2020, and we're about 2 years in. And we'd just done some worship, which if you're new to church, that's the singy bit. If you're not new to worship, you'll totally understand what I'm about to say. But we had a time of worship that just felt a bit flat. You know, it felt like that instead of singing about the cosmos-shattering love of God and the power of the Spirit and the work of Jesus' cross for us, it felt like we were kind of like singing through the phone book or something, and everyone just felt a bit flat. And I said to Jack in a bit of a rant, why is the whole church not exploding with gratitude in worship and hands in the air and spontaneously singing out? And he said to me, if everyone in the room has the hands in the air and they're singing spontaneously or whatever, then our job is done and we're probably in heaven, right? Ultimately, we need a mix of everything if we're following Jesus. We need people who are like, I'm not sure about this whole Jesus thing. We need some people like, I think it's too loud. We need some people who are like, you know what, I wish we were doing the songs from the 80s. We need a mix of everything. The thing is, I know most of you, as I'm preaching, are smiling and nodding and taking notes, and it's wonderful. But I also need, only a few of you, but I need some of you to give me your stank faces and be like, I'm not completely convinced on what he's talking about. Need some people to be looking curious and a bit frustrated with what I'm saying. Because if everyone is amening and taking notes and dialed in, our job is done, we're probably in heaven, and it's probably someone else preaching. We have to make space for people who aren't used to going to church. A former Archbishop of Canterbury said this way, the church exists primarily for the sake of those who are still outside of it. Making space makes room for all people. But also making space requires persistence. If you've got a spare room in your house, you know you have to persist in keeping it a spare room. Otherwise, it just ends up being the place where we dump stuff, whether it's laundry or random board games that we're not playing anymore. Like, it just builds up. Making space requires persistence. Luke says they tried to take him in, but they couldn't because of the crowd. And that's the moment most of us would stop. Sorry, buddy, I tried to get you to Jesus, but actually it was crowded. I'm going to go home now. They had an excuse. They tried. They showed up. It didn't work out. But yet they didn't get to the second week of January and give up on the resolution they made. They didn't stop inviting their mate because the first invitation wasn't accepted. They didn't stop praying because their friend wasn't healed the first time. They didn't try and find another church after not enjoying their first Sunday. They didn't think the worship leader wasn't anointed because they didn't play their jams. They didn't think the preacher was a false prophet because he didn't mention their passion piece. They did not give up. Instead, they went up on the roof and tried a different way. Now, roofs in first century Palestine were flat, made of beams, branches, and packed mud, and in this instance, tiles. And stairs often run up on the outside of the house. Can you imagine our 4 guys with Andrew on the mat clambering upstairs? It was disruptive. It was messy. It was inconvenient. And it was possibly offensive, and it even cost someone some money. I don't see anyone in the story offering to pay the bill for now this hole that's gaping in the roof. Making space will always offend the systems that benefit from things staying the same. We are hardwired as humans for comfort, for the everyday, for things to be normal, for things to be peaceful and static. Our bodies are constantly sending us signals that desire comfort. The reason gossip feels nice is because it's not us receiving the feedback. Fast food feels nice because it is instant and we haven't had to go to the effort of cooking. Self-medicating with alcohol or drugs in the moment seems to work, but it's like sticking a plaster over a shark bite. If at first you don't succeed, rewrite the script and tear a hole in the roof. Making space requires persistence. But you've got to remember this, that first, Jesus makes space. Before Jesus heals the man, the first thing we know about this story is he's made himself available, so much so that he's in a house, available and open for all kinds of people to come and hang out with him. And then he does something unexpected. He says, "Friend, your sins are forgiven." Jesus makes space between who the person is and what the person has done. So much of the world around us combines those two things and says you are what you do. And yet Jesus makes a separation there. The Bible says as far as the east is from the west, I don't know if it's that way, I don't have a compass on me, but as far as the east is from the west, that is how far he has removed our sins from us. And the religious leaders are furious. Only God can forgive sins. And they are right, and that's the point. Jesus is declaring something far deeper than just physical healing. He's restoring his identity, his dignity, and his right relationship with God. This man's paralysis would have been how he saw himself. He wouldn't be able to do anything and would have been seen as spiritually impure. And then in a couple of seconds, Jesus, God in flesh, calls him friend. An equal. He then says straight away, you can add value by walking and picking up your mat. And also know, you can go running into God's presence because you are forgiven. Totally transformed physically, but his dignity and his identity and his right relationship with God is now restored. Meeting God always comes before changing the world. But before the healing happens, Luke says something interesting. He says, when Jesus saw their faith, not his faith, but their faith. And in Hebrew and Greek understanding, faith is always accompanied with action. It makes no sense to say, I believe in Jesus, but live like someone who doesn't. Faith here is not just a belief that you've learned or something that you think in the back of your head. It's not something that's abstract, it is action. It's movement, and it's risking something. It's getting around a mat and physically lifting up someone else's burden. It's faith that climbs higher despite the obstacle. Faith that digs to make a way. And that's the kind of faith we want to foster here at this church. The kind that creates environments where others can meet God. The kind of faith that is willing to trust God to lay down personal preferences for our best mates who don't yet know Jesus. The kind of faith that is willing to give sacrificially out of our finances, our energy, to see young people find and trust and love Jesus. The kind of faith that is willing to worship with total abandon because of the outrageous grace that we have been afforded, that we can worship without fear of persecution and suffering. The kind of faith that makes space for people to meet God, find family, and change the world. And after an encounter with Jesus, this mat, the mat that identified everything about him, the mat that said everything about him, the mat that gave him parameters and identity, the mat becomes a message. After Jesus heals him, he says something fascinating. Pick up your mat and go home. The mat that was a symbol of his paralysis, his limitations, his past. Now it becomes his testimony. Now it becomes his story of grace. Everything in the economy of the kingdom of God can be used. If you open the mat of your pain, it can become a symbol of hope for others. Think about it for a second. Our Bibles are filled with people's mats becoming the message. How do we know that Adam neglected his responsibilities in the garden? How do we know that Moses ignored the commands of God? How do we know Joshua went and did things his own way? How do we know that David cheated and lied and murdered his way through leading the people of God? How do we know that James and John were always squabbling over authority? How do we know that Simon Peter betrayed Jesus and the apostles were often brash and overconfident? Because they told someone who wrote it in this book. They let their pain and their weakness and their flaws and their failings become a message of God's grace and his love and his power. If we try and hide our mats, if we try and pretend they don't exist, ultimately people will find us very impressive and say, well, aren't you lovely? You're a great person. You seem to navigate life and have a wonderful smile on your face. People are impressed by you. But if you let your mat become a message, then people will start to think, God must be pretty awesome to use someone who's as broken and messy as you. Psychology tells us that people who process suffering meaningfully are far more likely to help others through similar pain. Why? Well, the Bible talks about it all the time. Redemption is contagious. When people see us as redeemed people, they too long for redemption. God wastes nothing. None of our pain or suffering or sadness. He wastes nothing. I made a little video a couple of years ago with Streams, who are an online Instagram and TikTok thing that try and do this, try and help people communicate their mats becoming a message. Here's a little video of how I've seen God work through even my darkest shame and pain to lead to light and freedom for others. Let's watch the screen.
My dad, who's a wonderful guy, but had to be very busy to make ends meet, to look after 3 growing kids. And so there was a family friend who looked after me between the ages of 10 and 14, who routinely sexually abused me when I was a kid. And so it got to a point where I didn't want to tell anyone this was going on. I felt incredibly shameful about it all. I felt that I was trapped in this horrendously toxic relationship where this guy was meant to be looking after me as a kid, and then I was experiencing those kind of things. So I felt like the only thing I could do is lash out and leave home. I literally got on a National Express bus from Littlehampton as a 14-year-old and traveled all the way to London Victoria, and then got on the Underground and ended up at my mum's house. And it all happened very, very quickly. And I thought that getting to London, that would just solve my problems, right? And I still carried this for years. It was 12 years later that I told another human soul. A lot of the reasons behind that were shame, the idea that no one could possibly believe it happens. The guy was a nice guy to everyone. He was well known by the community. He did loads of great things. I'm just a little kid from a council estate. Why would my word kind of stand up against his? So I thought that people wouldn't believe me. I thought that I had such low self-esteem that I probably also thought that no one really cared. It's not really a problem. Like, it's just another thing, another bad thing. And it took me to the point of being in another country, on another continent, in Zambia, with our youth group. My wife and I were leading a group there. And a guy stood up who was I'd seen this guy. He was an incredible father, incredible husband. I'd watched him for a week that we were there. And he just said, I want to tell you my story. My first sexual experience was being raped by 4 men. And then he told us this intense testimony and then sat down. And I felt like in that moment, if that guy can do it, who has a functioning family, an attractive wife, some great kids that love him, a successful business, he was an architect, if he can be so radically honest with what God has done in and through him because of all the stuff he'd experienced, then maybe I could share this with my wife. And so we went back to where we were staying. And I remember it so vividly. We went for a walk and I said, I've got to tell you something. And I think my wife thought I was going to say something like, I'm cheating on you, or I've got 6 other children somewhere else. And when I told her everything about me, I was trying to give her permission to call off, like to walk away. Yeah, because I thought that if she knows this, then she won't want to be with me anymore. I just thought that was the natural repercussion. So I was fully ready at that point for her to walk away. And of course, that's not what she did at all. Of course it wasn't. But it was because of someone else's testimony that gave me the courage to then speak up. And so told the police, and then I knew going into that I'm going to have to face some demons. I'm going to have to say some things that you never want to say in public. I'm going to have to expose things that you never want to say to strangers. I'm going to have to say things to funny men in wigs and tell them about parts of my life that every part of me wanted to keep it hidden and secret. But through the whole process, I had to work out what it means for Jesus to bring light into darkness. And a passage that I always love is when Jesus is resurrected and he appears to the disciples in the upper room. They have every reason to be completely stressed. Their leader's gone. He's dead. They watched him die. They don't have the academia. They don't have the knowledge that Jesus had. They've got 3 years of experience with Jesus. And so all they've got is a load of stories. They're just like, oh yeah, well, I saw this happen. I was there. But what he says to them is beautiful. Peace I give to you. And in those moments when we feel completely stressed, we feel completely chaotic, our mind's going everywhere, God's greatest gift in that moment is not answers. It's not solutions. It's not self-help breathing methods. It's not, all of those things might be good, but the thing that God gives us is his peace. And his peace, what it feels like in that moment, isn't like, okay, it's going to go away, because I still had to stand in that dock. I still had to give testimony. I still had to face that guy. But it was a peace that is like, I've been there. You know, Jesus has been there. He's felt hurt. He's felt betrayal. He's felt abuse. He's been there. He's been so anxious that he sweat drops of blood. He's wept at his best friend's graveside. He's felt church hurt on a micro and a macro scale. He's felt all of those things. And so his peace, like, well, if it's good enough for the God of the cosmos in flesh to feel it, then he must be with me in this moment, feeling it again and being willing to feel it again. And so actually, who they're judging in that dock isn't me, it's Jesus. It's Christ in me that is going to be the hope of this situation, not me being a better version of me or me being a more articulate version of me. So a 14-year-old me moving to London was full of shame and guilt and was worried, and I was scared about what this new life was, but I was kind of hopeful that it would just solve the problems. But it didn't at all. It was only when speaking this stuff out, when giving it light, that the darkness was able to flee and find its proper place, right?
There's a lot in that video. I get it. And if you need to talk to anyone, we here have a safeguarding team, a pastoral care team, and who'd love nothing more than to listen and to signpost anything you need to process. Don't stay quiet. Jesus makes space, and then we move. Luke says the man stood up in front of them, took what he had been lying on, and went home praising God. He doesn't stay in the room, he goes. Encounter with God leads to movement. And this is the rhythm of the gospel. Come and see, but then go and tell. Because ultimately, church is not the final destination. Our aim is not just to simply gather lots of people here, it's to send people out, to equip people to be everyday evangelists in uni, in their workplace, at home, to plant churches in forgotten areas, to send missionaries, whether it's down to Wavertree or down to Garston or down to Outer Mongolia. And I love what's been going on in students and young adults at the moment with this group that they formed called Spotfire. I'm far too old for it, so I just hear about it along the grapevine. And what they do is they meet together, they make space in their week to meet together to pray for our city. But they don't just stop there. They then say, well, let's go out into the city and pray for people who might need to know about Jesus. And we're seeing people being prayed for in the cemetery of the cathedral and in the high street. When we respond to God's grace, we can't possibly sit still. And then the story ends with everyone making space. Luke ends with this, that everyone was amazed and gave praise to God. They were filled with awe. When we make space, God fills it. We overflow. The thing is, I did some real quick maths in the week, and basically if you sleep 8 hours a day, and you work a 9 to 5 job, and you commute about 1 to 2 hours, and you eat meals and you prepare meals, and you get dressed and brush your teeth, then basically most people have about 5 to 6 hours on average free time every day. Do you know how many hours we spend on our phones on average? 5 hours. If we don't make space for God to move, how are we expecting God to move? When we make space, he fills it. And our mission starts with making space for a reason. We make space for people to meet God, find family, and change the world. And it means some real practical things. We make space in our services for people who don't know the songs. We intentionally use a familiar bank of songs. If you come to church regularly, you might think, why are we doing this song again and again and again? Because we're trying to build familiarity for those who are new to church. We make space in our language for people who don't know the Bible. All of our talks here go through a bit of an editing process so that we eliminate any Christianese or weird Christian jargon so that your best mate who doesn't know anything about church can follow along in our talks. We make space in our diaries for people who need time. If you are new to this church, we are not a busy church. We do Alpha, we do groups, we do Sundays, and then the occasional worship night, and we do some mission stuff in prison. But we want to make sure that being a member of this church does not mean you suddenly lose all your friends outside of church, but you have space and time to invest in those relationships properly. We make space in our leadership for new voices. We intentionally raise up younger preachers and speakers of the next generation. We make space in our structures for growth. We always try and think as if we are double the current size, which means we make decisions based on those not yet in the room. How can we fit in more chairs? How can we fit in more services? How can we do that so that people who are not yet in the room can come and feel welcome? But also and ultimately, we're a church that makes space for one another. Loneliness is now described by the UK government as a public health issue. 1 in 7 people say they have no close friends. And I believe that the church is uniquely positioned to offer family and meaningful friendships. But those things can only form if we make space for them. And so the small moments matter. Because ultimately, people don't usually meet God in dramatic moments first. They meet him through invitation and through welcome and through consistency. Most people come to faith through relationships, not events. A seat made available next to you. A conversation after church. When you remember someone's name. When you offer to take someone out for coffee. People need the whole body of church to find Jesus. Because all of us preaches a message. Whether you've got a microphone or not, your presence says something and communicates something before any word spoken ever does. Ultimately, the friends didn't abandon the mission when they encountered an obstacle. They just changed the method. Because our creativity will equal longevity. If we want to do this for the long haul, we have to get creative. Healthy churches hold theology tightly, but their methods loosely. Because Jesus never asked us to preserve forms. He asked us to make disciples. So if we encounter blocked doors, we have to find the roof. So here's the challenge as we leave. How do we make space? Where is it in our lives that we need to create margin? Who are we carrying? Who is around us that doesn't look or sound like us, who needs to be carried to Jesus? What roof around us needs opening and what system needs rethinking? The mission, when we follow Jesus, is not to become miracle-making demon slayers. Although if all of us were that, that'd be super cool. But the mission is to become faithful to Jesus by making room for people to encounter him who will make miracles and slay demons. Jesus is always ready to move and meet people. The question is whether we'll make space for it. And this story shows us that revival doesn't start with massive crowds. It starts with friends willing to carry one person. When we make space, people meet God. When people meet God, they find family. And when they find family, they change the world. So let's be that kind of church as we make space.